All right, well, we'll get underway. RMIT University acknowledges the people of the Woi Wurrung and Boon Wurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. RMIT University respectfully acknowledges their ancestors and elders, past and present. RMIT also acknowledges the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. So welcome everyone to the final BE Design Team Expert Panel of the year on gamification. I should point out a little bit of housekeeping. We do have cameras up back. We are live streaming, so we don't actually, you can just take a seat anywhere, thank you. We don't actually film the audience, unless of course you decide to walk in front of the tables here, because that's all we're filming. So great. I will introduce everyone. We've got down the end Aliki Christou. Next to her is Dr. Charles daCosta and Andrew Del Mastro. How was my pronunciation on? Close. It was close, thank you. And Diana Swift. And I nailed that conversation. All right, so today's question is, what is best practice in gamification for VET industry and skills training? And one of the hallmarks of gamification is when somebody achieves something, they get a reward. So you've all achieved something because you're here. Not everyone is here, but you are. So well done, you've achieved. So we are going to give an achievement award to one person in the room. So before we started, I hid a prize underneath the chairs. So if everyone could just reach under their chair, grab the reward. And it was under my chair. So that is the first lesson for today, because it doesn't matter how big the reward is. If it's not fair, the students will feel ripped off and disappointed. You feel ripped off and disappointed, don't you? So congratulations, you've learned something already. We're going to be dropping a number of learning bombs on you today. The 12th learning bomb will shock you. So if you're thinking of leaving early, do not leave before the 12th learning bomb. So we'll start. We've got Aliki Christou. She's the first speaker. Come on. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Thank you RMIT and the VE Design team for having me today. And thank you to the other panellists for joining me. Thank you. Yeah, it's really a pleasure to be here, and I think it's going to be really interesting for me too, because I know I haven't collaborated with the other panel members to find out what they've written about, so it'll be interesting to see whether we've got overlap or distinctly different sort of approaches to this particular topic. So for me, I'm going to be, because we've got only a really short amount of time, I'm looking at basically embedding behavioural design in gamification. That's the bit that I'll be looking at in the next 5 minutes. But as Jane McGonigal says, lots of things have bells and whistles, but not the heart of the game. So for me, it's pretty essentialist, and that's what I'll be looking at. And my background's in behavioural science and psychology, which probably explains why I've kind of approached it in this way. So my experience, I've got experience in the not-for-profit sector, for-purpose industry, higher ed, vocational education. I've just seen someone, Andrew from Box Hill, and I used to work with Andrew at Box Hill. And essentially that's where I started in e-learning and started learning the ropes and looked at things like gamification, and it was a completely new world for me. In terms of what I'm interested in, I'm really interested in transformation projects, digital learning, gamification, product management, and the learner experience, and making sure that it's always eye on improving it and making it better. And I'm currently the learning manager with Clear Horizon, and I'll quickly talk about who Clear Horizon is. Clear Horizon is essentially a company that helps organisations in co-design and evaluation. So their big thing is evaluation. They're in industry and they're looking at 3 particular sectors, particularly in the spaces of good work, of social justice, environmental and sustainability, and international aid. So they're the 3 areas that they work in. But for me, I'm the learning manager, and my role there is to basically build capability predominantly in the sector in evaluation, and gamification comes into that too. So the people that we work with in terms of learners are people like program managers, project managers, funders, philanthropy commissioners, evaluation consultants, both in government, in other organisations, and people that work as consultants. I'm going to start off with essentially a little bit of gamification. So I want you to all turn to your phone and go to menti.com and basically answer that question. So for you, what comes to mind when you think of gamification in the area of vet, industry and skills training? Where are the responses? Okay. Great. So we're really getting some good, interesting, healthy responses to this one. And I think that why I started off here was that when I looked at gamification and when I was asked to be a part of the panel, I had to really revisit what it meant for me. And noticed that, out there in doing the reading, obviously it means lots of different things for lots of different people, depending on where you're coming from. Thank you. So you've spoken, and basically things like engagement, fun, making it interactive, innovative. What else have we got up there? Aligned, badges, connection, competence, student retention. So we're already getting a feel from the room that this isn't essentially, when we think about gamification, it's not just this thing that lives out here, a product or one thing. It can mean so many things to people. And, we've got mixes of emotion and affect, but also things like badges, which are far more, concrete and looking at that sort of extrinsic motivation. Thank you. Outcome focused. Great. So what is gamification? We've just looked at what gamification could mean to all of us. The definition that I've got here is basically using game elements in a non-gaming context to drive engagement, loyalty, and a desired action. But I'm not certainly attached to that particular definition. I've just popped it up there. But for us in vet training and skills training, it's basically getting someone to change their behaviour or to influence their behaviour in a way that it will impact in their work ultimately or in a simulated work environment. So it's getting to achieve those learning outcomes through gamification elements, but also making a difference at work or in skills. For me, a little while ago, some of you may already be across this, but Fogg's behaviour model, I always go back to this when I'm thinking about behaviour change, but particularly with things like gamification. So best practice, what does it mean? It's not simply about putting something, yes, it is about fun and making it engaging and enjoyable, but, it is about things like how do we influence someone to make a change in their behaviour, and that's far more inherent than just making something superficial or chucking something in for the sake of it. So how do we do that? And according to Fogg, there are three things to changing behaviour. There are three elements that come into play at one point in time to make a difference. They're things like motivation. A person needs to be motivated enough to make that change. They need to have the ability to do it. And there needs to be a trigger or a call to action. What do these things look like? So in the world of gamification, they look like extrinsic and intrinsic motivators. So some things like badges or extrinsic rewards that will be a motivation. For some people, it's more about intrinsic motivators. In terms of ability, when we give them something to do, when we give our learners something to do, have we scaffolded enough so that when they actually come to do it, can they do it? Or are we getting them to do something before they're ready to do it? Have they got the capability? Have they got the time? Have they got the resources? And then when we call to action and we trigger, we give them something and we say, you know what, do this, think about this, action it. What are we providing as prompts? Both sensory, and in terms of the channels, the design, everything about it, so that stuff that we're saying call to action, and the internal prompts, so psychological, emotional and memory. So basically those three things need to come into play to really make a difference and change. So what else do we need to consider? Understand your learners. I mean, I know that I said at the start about the bells and whistles thing, but essentially it is about understanding the learner and the student experience and really getting to understand what motivates them, what's going to be good in terms of getting their ability there, what's going to be good, what are they going to respond to in terms of a call to action. And that's really about understanding the learner experience and understanding the particular learner cohort. Making sure that, that your gamification elements, whatever they might be, in terms of mechanics, that they actually are aligned to your learning outcomes. Again, not just there for the sake of it. And make it fun. So, I mean, this is really subjective again around, I know that the word gamification too is subjective, and we saw that earlier about a whole lot of what that might mean. But again, fun is really subjective too, but it's about understanding your audience and understanding the learner and what speaks to them. And evaluate. So use data and qualitative information to inform what works and what could work in the future. So joining Clear Horizon, which is an evaluation company, they not only look at data, which we know in our world, learner data is really important and can inform us what could be working or might not be working. But what I've really learnt with Clear Horizon is that element of qualitative feedback and qualitative reviews, and asking those questions of learners, almost like, in best practice, it would almost be like a co-design approach with your learner. So going right back to the start and involving your learners, involving the student, getting a small focus group. Does this work? Are they responding? Or am I completely, missing the mark? Best practice, I would say, is really going back to that beginning and joining the learner and really bringing them along in your journey to that. The other thing is iterate. Sometimes, in terms of best practice, you're not always going to hit the mark first up. Some things will work and some things won't. Things that I use in my work and have used in the past, in terms of, I use collaboration, so lots of teamwork stuff. I know that with Clear Horizon, and this is in industry, in terms of our online learning, one of the challenges was essentially taking face-to-face learning into the online world, basically with face-to-face learning that's highly participatory. And how does that translate into the online world, and making sure that that's all about, about collaboration, really bringing that forth and bringing those team elements and group work, and that's been working well. Embedding scenarios, case studies, storytelling, projects, real-life assignments. Those are the sorts of things that I'm basically embedding at the moment, and as much personalisation and autonomy as possible too. These elements are slightly different for me, so things like progress bars, dashboards, indicators. This is the sort of stuff that you'll see quite immediately. The learner will respond to immediately. It'll give them immediate feedback, which is really, in that area of gamification. Points and badges can work. Leaderboards, levels, quizzes, learning paths, all these things can work, but in best practice, it's really about what works for your learner, what works for your particular learner audience, might not work for that next class over there. So it's really trying to work with the resources, your time, your budget, to be able to deliver the best gamification sorts of elements or mechanics and respond to your particular learner group. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Aliki. Just a reminder, there will be question time at the end, so write your questions down because you will forget them. and then when I ask for questions, you'll be avoiding eye contact more than usual. So next, it's Dr. Charles daCosta. Please welcome Dr. Charles. Oh.
So thanks for allowing me to come here. It's wonderful to see all of you here. Trust me, we sometimes talk to empty rooms. And then you have about 200 students and 3 people ask questions afterwards and you feel, oh, that's lovely. So thank you. Okay, so we've had some very interesting, do I go forward this way? Good. So one of the interesting things that happens with experts is they're just groups of people who think alike. And so their ideas overlap. And that's what's happening here. I'm sitting there thinking, oh no, she said everything. She's giving you the definition, so I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to try to do is hopefully give you a little interesting play on what this is about. Because it's gamification, isn't it? That's what we keep talking about. Okay, how do I get this to play? I need it to play. Sorry, I'm not used to this system. Just play. There's a video in there.
You set it to play automatically with a click?
Yes.
Then it should click. If not,
It's up on the...
It's there, but...
if not, you will manually. Yeah, it doesn't look like you've set it to play.
Okay.
Free from their mother's care, the 5 musketeers must now make an impression on their world. Being independent, they are finally ready to live up to their old mother's legacy. Hunting giraffe. Further down the bank, 2 musketeers
The tension is building. It's good.
get into position.
Okay, so the question is, who knows what those animals or creatures are? Who knows what they are? Anyone knows what creatures they are? Amazing, isn't it? No, they're lions. Yes. Yeah, exactly. The question is, it's all about how lions graduate. I don't remember the last time I went to a lion school. And I don't remember the last time I heard of lion curricula. Any of you heard? So the question is, how do they learn to behave in the way they do? And they do it so well that from pride to pride, their techniques and their tactics are different. The question is, how do they do it? It's through play, I believe. Okay. So, isn't that amazing? They never took MBAs. But they learn somehow. And it's not through instinct, because you can teach a lion to chill out. Back in 1983, as a teenager, I went back, I had to go back to Ghana, my native Ghana, and there was a famine in the country. And so some of the zookeepers were given all this meat to give to the lions. After a while, the zookeepers said, look at us, we're hungry. The animals, they don't pay bills. They're all right. Let's eat the meat. Let's give them the grain. So they started giving the animals cornmeal to eat, the lions. And the lions became vegetarians. They refused meat afterwards. You can teach them. You see where I'm going? Okay. So we do know that apex predators are well known for their superb intelligence. But intelligence doesn't come easy. Intelligence is just how you use your knowledge. Wisdom is actually where it comes in. That's where it makes a difference. Now the question is, as trainers, and I thought I'll make it a little bit more conversational, as trainers involved in VET, how do we engage our learners in ways in which they make an impact? Because remember, you can give them the technology, you can give them you can give them the software, you can give them all the curriculum, but if they make no impact, they make no impact. Learning, as I'm beginning to find out as I grow older, is more than just passing the exams. It's not just about giving them the curriculum, but it's actually about getting the people to think for who they're getting the information is being transmitted to. Think like who you want to reach. You know, one of the very interesting things that I discovered from asking questions was that I was myself deficient because I was giving them something I'd been prescribed, not them. And so one of the things that I've learned increasingly that is missing from our classrooms or from our curricula is the whole thing of play. When was the last time students played with each other? And I'm not talking about Minecraft. I'm not talking about those things. Is there anyone here who can actually share my experience with me? Get to a classroom and students just want to be on their own. They don't want to do group work. Anyone had that experience? Yeah, because we're giving them all those games to play on their systems. But have we taught them to play together so they can collaborate? And so one of the strategies that I started to adapt, and I learned from a very wise old man. The strategy is when you get to the classroom, whether it's a game you're watching or whether it's a movie you're watching, start from the back to the beginning. Let them watch the credits and ask questions. What's that? Watch how bored they get when they're watching the credits. Then remind them that one day their mom's going to sit through the whole movie and just see the one line, there's Fasad, oh, look at you, look at his name. No one saw it, but the mom saw it and everyone else saw it. And everyone else in that family is proud, right? Because that's their name. So again, it's about going back and working forward. And so when they see those credits, the next exercise I'll normally give them, whether it's in game design or it's in filmmaking, is right. Do you think you can work together? Get together and tell a little story. And they get together and they tell that story. And the next thing is code, code, code. I thought I'll make it a little bit more interactional. So code, code, code. Find out what systems you need. Find out what practices you need to be using. What are the tools you need? And very interestingly, students will very quickly begin to understand their deficiencies and find out what they need. They get more engaged. And that's often happening because, again, from observation, a lot of students come to open day, and what's the question they ask? Especially when you got that kid that's really impressing their parents. Like, they know what's going on. What software do you use here? What systems do you have? Anyone got that question during open day? It's my time up. Okay. So essentially, what happens is, before they get to the systems and practices that they're going to use, they've got to understand the culture of the place. Acculturate. What does all this stuff give them to do? Psychological and physical exercises. We need them. See, vet training is so important to me because in a way, some institutions have put it to one side. Oh, we're the degree and they're the vocational ones. But learning is learning. And one of the important things is that whatever we do, they've got to converge to make us useful to society. And so I say, look, they've already had enough time sitting on their devices. Give them those games to play. Put them together like kids. When you put children together, very interesting thing happens. They invent games. They make games. Put them together in a place, tell them nothing, give them nothing, and they invent games, okay? Okay. So when did you last play a traditional game? Anyone remembers playing any traditional games recently? See what I mean? There's only one person who's brave enough to have played a traditional game. Now, see, by learning those traditional games, what you learn is the psychology of the people, you learn more about behavior, you learn about social structures, so many things are rolled in one, and you're not even being examined for it. So that already is gamification. See those applications that Aliki was talking about? That's it. See, you learn core histories. They're really important. What makes that game tick? What makes those people tick? Share those experiences. And then when you've started to gather that, don't think you're going to get away with it. You're going to have to code. You see what happens? When you do all those things and you ask students to learn the practices, you learn the skills, those technological skills, they begin to see the relevance. See, the whole thing about experiential design starts with experience before design. Is this making sense, or am I scaring somebody, or am I upsetting anybody? Because if I am, please tell me, I'll run out. All right? Who ever heard this before? My mom used to tell me that when I was a kid. Stop, look, and listen. That's one childhood lesson. The important thing is once they start to code, they'll stop, look, and listen. Because they'll begin to realize that if they don't look at behavior properly, they can't code it properly, and they won't get a good response from the audience. Is that making sense here? Okay. Maybe I should stop preaching and wrap up soon, sorry. Okay. See, once people have learned how to design, they would begin to design to solve problems as opposed to design to pass a test or to get some accreditation. Again, rather than whinge, what a lot of people do when they have to do assignments. Oh, it's too much work. Oh, I've got to do too much math. I've got to do too much that. They begin to emulate solutions. They look for solutions and try to adopt them. See, that's where behavioral change happens, not just with the audience, but with the designer and with the instructor of the designer. See, when people have been confident enough to emulate solutions, they can actually begin to make a business case, why things work, and talk with the confidence they need to do. They need it. Again, you might make a good business case, but you've got to remember, it's important to learn those core technological skills as well. So it's our duty to constantly remind them that, look, yeah, you're doing a good job, but hey, why don't you, in making your business case, build a blog, do something else and get some response from out there. Create an interesting blog or create an interesting website that actually gets you to use the tools in a real-world situation. Right? I hated suits. It was when I went to business school as an animator. I was forced to go to business school because they had a grant, you know what I mean? Everyone likes money. So I got to business school and I had to wear a suit. And I had to learn to make a business case. It was so stressful. But we can do it in a less stressful way. Talk to people, because you're making games for people. So we have to encourage our students to talk to people outside the department. And we have to let them know that what they learn should be brought into their work. I had to teach some live drawing classes. And normally what happens is people sit there, right? A model comes in, and they just draw the model. Then I decided one semester, I was actually bored of sitting in their room. So I decided, let's take them out. Let's go. Come on, everyone, go to the park and go and draw. Come back with 2,000 drawings. And they said, how are we going to do that? I said, I don't care. But they all came back, and they had bits of drawings and pieces of things. They couldn't draw 2,000 people, but they drew 3,000 ways of looking at people. It's a way of relating to people. And also, as they did it, people would ask them, what are you doing? I said, I'm drawing. Why are you drawing here? Well, because I have a project. And they, can I see? They talk to them. They learn to talk to people. The primary exercise is not the drawing, but it's teaching them how to talk to people, because you're going to sell to people. All right? Okay. It'll soon be over. So how do we do this? One of the things that I encourage us to do is from the very first day the students walk into class, we put them into teams, groups, but don't call them groups. I like to call them tribes. And one of the things I say is, folks, you get to know their number, that person's email address, form an Instagram group or WhatsApp group or Instagram, whatever, but you're supposed to do that. If there's an issue, report to each other first and then tell me. So you start, if you can't come to class, tell one of the members of your group that you can't come to class, because when you're working on a project, you're going to have to report to each other. And then when I ask, why is such a person not in class? Or there are 5 of you, how come only 2 of you are here? They report and say, well, so-and-so is ill, or so-and-so is getting that. You learn how to talk for each other. Because when you look at the credits of a movie, they're clustered in groups. Those groups are units. Charity begins at home, That's what I call them. I usually call them tribes, because tribes often work together. And out of that, we get the prides, the lions. They might all look the same, but actually, they work in little groups. And those groups are sort of tribes that are called prides. Prides of lions are different. And that's where behavior change occurs. Now, another one to end my thing. Can you see how the lecturer steps in to kind of remind them that, hey, it's not all about play. It's about learning through the fun situation. One last question. Any of you ever had to drink some cough medicine when they were kids? If you had to, please put your hands up. You never did? Oh, no. Okay. So the question here is, was it sweet? Why do you think it's sweet? Answer that in your own time. Thank you very much.
And we are all wondering what happened to that giraffe. Is that... Right, okay. Next up is Andrew Del Mastro. Please make him feel welcome.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me out to have a chat. As the slide says, my name's Andrew Mastro and I'm working at St Aloysius College, which is a Catholic girls' high school in North Melbourne. Previous to that, some of you may know me, I was working in the ADG in the College of Business here. So these ideas I've seen, they've been kicked around, they're not new. And the idea of learning through games is quite old. Just listening to our first two speakers was very inspirational. I think they nailed it. So I'll draw on some of their points and then share some of the concrete things that we're doing at St Aloysius in terms of gamification. But just to get started, I thought the game Monopoly, people have played it. Does anyone know when it was invented and by whom it was invented? No, yes, no. So yeah, it just dawned on me in terms of like learning through games. So it was invented in the early 1900s, and depending on your source, I mean, you know, sometimes I don't like to let the truth get in the way of a good story, but according to a brief, quick internet search, early 1900s by a woman called Elizabeth Maggie, and it was originally called the Landlord's Game. And she was inspired to create that game to teach people something. Now, if you've played Monopoly, I guess what it teaches is you a number of things, like who's got the shortest temper. And essentially Monopoly just progresses and progresses, and how do you win or lose Monopoly? When does it end? Apart from like someone flipping the table.
Get hotels on Mayfair.
You get the hotels, and then you just crush everybody and drain everybody until you own them. So originally the game Monopoly was invented to teach people about the perils of capitalism. And that's why it was invented. Funny that it's gone on to sell millions and millions of copies and make a bunch of money, but that's kind of like an example of learning through games and how we can learn through games. Sitting back and listening, and before I get to kind of the slide decks, the elements of a game. So what makes a game enjoyable? Looking at game mechanics. The best way to learn about gamification is to play games. So I love board games, play online games, a bit of Xbox and whatnot. Kids love games, and gaming's just become a boom to the point now where the World Health Organization has an actual gaming disorder listed as a disease. So gamification in games is a big part of our lives. The questions in terms of what makes them engaging, what makes them fun, I think will lead you to the answer of how to embed it into your curriculum and learning and teaching practice. So looking at those elements, identifying those elements, and then embedding those elements. Story, progression, achievement, collaboration. We've already heard about these things, bringing them to the forefront. But a big part of it for me is play and discovery. When you're playing a game, you're learning through discovery. And to me, that's kind of a big part of what I try and bring to the learning design. Especially in the high school context where you might be surprised to learn, where a lot of teachers are still using the lessons to do content delivery. So instead of content delivery, content discovery is a nice way to think of it. And that was the approach that the people took towards, have you heard of the Discovery Channel? So the reason it's called the Discovery Channel is because they didn't want to get experts, right? They didn't want to get people going, you know, I'm a marine biologist, this is what seaweed is. They wanted to get everyday people, film those everyday people making discoveries. So that's why it's called the Discovery Channel. So bringing an element of discovery and play, even to the content and the structure, I think has real value. The other thing that really struck me, and in terms of the VE context, is connecting it to the real world. And that's what's so great about VE. It's connected to real world outcomes. It's concrete, the outcomes are explicit, and they're measurable. So solving a problem and problem solving is also a big part of games for me as well. So how do you make it a discovery? How do you make it a problem to be solved? And how do you use that as the provocation and the entry point into the content and the curriculum? And that's what I'm trying to do with the students at St Aloysius College, but also with the teachers as well, and bringing that into their practice. So my role is the design thinking and innovation leader, and I wasn't exactly sure what that meant when I took the job, and I think I'm kind of still trying to figure it out. But in high schools now, and especially in our school, and our principals leading that direction of creating students who are problem solving and giving them processes to work through curriculum and content. So the design thinking process is the vehicle that can be applied across key learning areas. And my job in terms of innovation is looking at emerging pedagogies and how to embed them. And when we talk about emerging pedagogies, like this stuff's been around for a while. It's not that new. In terms of what we're doing there, this is a screenshot from Batman that I've recently been playing, Arkham City, I think. And what I found when I was playing the game was that you go and do a little challenge, you know, you've got to blow up some tanks in the Batmobile or whatever, and then it immediately links to your friend list and you can see what your friends scored on the same task. So this is leaderboards, points are definitely a part of games and gamification. I mean, you remember if you used to play, you know, Street Fighter or Donkey Kong, the local milk bar, there's the leaderboard, right? The sense of achievement of entering in your initials or a 3-letter swear word, you know, was like a mark to leave behind. So in the classroom, depending on the software doesn't really matter, the tool doesn't really matter. I use Quizzes, it's free, and has live leaderboards. So either in the classroom, you can put the kids into teams or the students into teams. They can be individual, and I change it up. Sometimes it's an individual challenge, finish top of the leaderboard, and I do a quiz before the topic when the students have zero knowledge about the issue or whatever it is we're studying, right? So I expect them to fail. There's a big thing again at our school of encouraging students to fail early, so that they can then see their progression. So I don't know if you've ever played Mario, but you get 3 lives and you're gonna die. Like, it's part of it, you're gonna fail. So you go jump, jump, die, jump, 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 duck, die, jump, 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 duck, die, right? So you're learning through failing. Get the kids to take the quiz. They don't do well, I tell them I expect them to fail. Then 2-3 weeks later, same quiz. In the meantime, they can take the quiz as many times as they want to prepare for the next in-class activity. And it might be in teams. So they get that sense of achievement. This is some data, again, with playing games. And if you're talking about quizzes, what we like to get back as from the teaching point of view is data, measurable data to test where they're at, where their gaps are in their knowledge. So on the back end, that's what it's giving me as a teacher. It's giving me that formative feedback of their performance. I don't like to have the major assessment be a surprise when the students take it. You go, wow, that person failed. I like to know where they're at before they get to the assessment, so that's where that formative feedback comes in, and this is a really good tool to do that. This is a little bit more, this is not off the shelf. This is something we developed in line with the VCE teachers. So this is a spreadsheet that students use to predict their study score. Right, so I don't know if the pointer works. I've deleted the students' names for obvious reasons. Unit 3, outcome 1, if you get this score, it'll then change your study score at the end. So the last column's predicted study score. In games, this is a leaderboard, but it's also showing them their progression. So, okay, what study score do you want to get? Or what do you need to pass this subject? You know, I need 80%. Okay, so we plug in 80 at the end. You need to average this across the assessments based on their weighting to achieve that score, right? They get a low score on their first one. Now you have to get these numbers to achieve your target goal. So it's being explicit using data with where they want to get to. So, and I think for me that kind of ties back to a game as well, because you know where you want to get to, you know the path, you know the progress where you want to make, and it's kind of transparent, right? So we try to be as open as possible. We want them to do well, and it helps them to know where they're on track. So the trickiest part is kind of like weighting it all, and then it's color-coded. If you're green, you're on track. Yellow, red, basic traffic light system. So that's something that we've implemented there. Anybody know what this is? Be surprised if you like the exact thing. Dark Souls, yes, so we have a gamer here. So this is Dark Souls. Anybody who can kind of look at what it is? Kind of looks like my career path a little bit. So it's a map with legends. and it can show you how to move through the world. And often you'll start a game and it'll have a map and it can show you the whole world, but some areas of that map will be blacked out and you have to do certain achievements to unlock certain areas of the map. And you go, gee, I really want to go to that zone, or I really want to go there, I really want to go there. It's bringing elements of kind of self-direction, that ability to unlock, and that sense of progression. So how do we bring something like that into the classroom? I know that, I'm not sure at what point the rollout is with Canvas. I don't want to get too deep into Canvas because it's a controversial subject, slash topic, but stuff like mastery paths, or even being able to choose your curriculum. Like, here's what we're going to study in this 2-week block. How you get to the end is up to you. So it's a part of that blended learning type thing where you're controlling pace, place, path. So if you can control your path through your learning, that's an element of gamification directly from blended learning. How you get to your goal is up to you, your individual journey that you're on. Week 1, topic 1, everybody do this, is probably a little bit opposed to kind of this type of structure or setup. So how we do it, again, it's learning paths. That translates to learning paths. And we kind of touched on it earlier. A score of 75% will unlock this module, learning that language, embedding that language into my topics, into what I teach. Not topic 1, stage 1, stage 2, mastery, unlocking. This type of language from games you can bring in to a topic or a unit. Again, what I kind of working with my teachers doing PD at school, start small. You're not going to gamify 4 terms worth of work. Try doing it with 1 topic. Gauge the student's reaction, right? Introduce that language. Right, this is the game that we're going to play. Our game is to get here in teams. These are the stages. You're a game designer, right? If you've set up a good game, you can just put it in front of people and walk away, right? And that's really easy teaching for me. That's when I'm like really happy, where I can just be like, here's the stuff, and then I can just like disappear into the background and the students are just like, it's like, that's nice. That's when I know I've designed something that's working. In terms of just kind of wrapping up, just wanted to touch on what we're trying to do with this and why we're doing this is because we want to create problem solvers, not, knowledge retainers or people regurgitating stuff. We want to know that they can solve problems, they can think on their own, they can navigate, and they can collaborate. So that's what's driving our push towards gamification from 7 to 12, and we're slowly working towards that. So again, thanks for your time, and look forward to some questions.
Well, that was fantastic. We've had 3 completely different takes on the question, and now Diana Swift. Please make Diana Swift welcome.
Good morning. So, lucky last, as I roll in 4th, I look at what I have in front of me and think I'm going to need to twist this a little bit so that you're not hearing the same story over and over again. So, I am from Swinburne University. My role is Executive Manager of Transforming Learning within Pathways and Vocational Education. So, dual sector deliverer of qualifications right through to from Cert 1 through to Masters and PhDs. But what I am focusing on are the vocational education qualifications and our curriculum qualifications and Unilink programs for students. So that brings with it a different challenge to what our higher ed transforming learning people need to look at when they're designing learning programs or strategies for bachelors, undergraduate bachelors and masters and PhD courses. So my role is to help implement a strategy that ensures we're providing the best learning environments for our students and that we're preparing them for whatever their pathway will be. Most of their pathways will be pathways into the workforce, but a proportion of them will be pathways to a chosen higher education course. Today I'm going to focus mainly on the vocational education side, as was the brief. And I'm going to look at the classroom. So vocational education teachers are stressed, they're overworked, they're under the pump a lot of the time. Many classes have poor retention, they have trouble engaging their students. Sometimes they get to the end of semester and really wonder if they've learnt as much as they possibly can. As we've heard, as we all know, gamified activities can show increases, quite significant increases in retention, in enthusiasm, in engagement. But is that necessarily the case for all vocational education students studying their chosen path? And I'll touch on some examples a little bit further on that we've tried, some succeeded, some failed. We've all grown up in a gamified world. It may not have been gamified activities based on technology. It could have just been the times table quiz in the classroom with a board that was up on the side of the teacher's desk that proudly showed every day for everyone to see who was the fastest with their times table and who was the slowest, and obviously less intelligent, maybe the dunce of the classroom. What does that do for self-esteem? And that can be a question that needs to be asked, particularly with some of our cohorts in vocational education. Games are great and they are a great way to learn, but they also need a very tight link into the curriculum. We need to ensure that what is being delivered actually meets our learning outcomes. Is it providing our vocational education students the immersion in the world of work that they need? Or is it just another way to pump more material out to them without the context? So teachers need to consider how any of these activities that they're introducing into the classroom are meeting those final outcomes of preparing our students for work based on whatever criteria they need in the units they're delivering. Having said that, many of our students come from higher education having lived through these environments. Many of our students, this is their day-to-day learning in schools. They're used to these activities, they're used to technology. Technology is going to remain a very, very important part of their life. So we need to ensure that we're continuing to grow on the experiences they've had in their secondary and primary schooling and are continuing to develop those technological skills as they need them. Some of the disadvantages, and these are all, they've all been covered off in articles when you read them. And does it decrease students' attention span? Does the immediate feedback, is it encouraging a need to have feedback immediately, which is not always the case in our working life? So are we developing attributes that students necessarily need to do, may need for the workplace? The cost. We're a vocational education provider. We don't have much money, not like our higher ed counterparts. So some solutions are expensive. Teachers need upskilling. Some solutions might require admin support to actually implement, particularly those that are based on a technology delivery. So those considerations also need to be analysed when you consider how it gets rolled out into the classroom. How is it going to be duplicated if that one expert teacher moves on and the next delivery has teachers that are not, that this is not their field, this is not their passion? We tend to find at Swinburne that gamified activities tend to be delivered by those teachers that are most innovative, which is great. But unfortunately, not all of our teachers are this innovative. So we need to always consider how it is then going to be replicated for different deliveries, whether that be within the same semester, a delivery by a teacher for a different cohort at another time or a different mode online, or progressively over the semesters. We also need to make sure that our teachers are not forgetting what their role is. So vocational education, we take pride in employing teachers that are leaders in their industry, that are vocationally current, and their job is to share the skills that they have developed through their time in the workplace, through their industry engagement. We need to make sure that these activities are not taking away from the sharing of those experiences, but are actually working hand in hand. So looking at gamification at Swinburne, we don't have a strategy for it. We don't have an overriding divisional objective that says that gamified activities need to occur in every course, in every level. It is left up to the teaching areas, the course leaders, the managers. So we have pockets of use of these activities, some more sophisticated than others. We have Kahoots and quizzes and a lot of the freely available activities that roll out all the time. Many teachers are using those in their classrooms, but with consideration to how the leaderboards are used. We have students that have not performed well in secondary education who feel like they are the bottom of the pit as educational achievement goes. So we need to be very careful about how we manage the self-esteem of these students. Are we just creating another competitive environment where they feel inferior to those who can perform better in the classroom? We have many, many migrant English and students that English is not a strong point for them. We need to consider how they are going to feel in these environments as well. An example of this, many of you may have heard of Quitch, a gamified mobile platform, which was originally developed back in Swinburne, it's possibly 6 or 7 years ago now, and has since been commercialised and many institutions use it. It is a tool that is used to push out information. Students can answer quizzes to gain an understanding of what their knowledge acquisition was from whatever activity they were doing at the day. There are leaderboards. Students can compete against each other. They can compete against themselves. They don't need to compete if that's their choice. That was originally designed for Year 1 and undergraduate students in the accounting program, so higher ed students. And they found there was a 12% increase in engagement, a 7% increase improvement in results. Fabulous. Thought this is great. We deliver accounting in vocational education. We will try it as well. So we rolled it out into the Cert 4 of accounting, as it was at the time, and the Diploma of Accounting, and the results were quite different. We had a cohort which probably part of that cohort represents what you would imagine your higher ed students to be, and they were very engaged in the activities, used it, gained great benefit from it. We had another group of students in the same classroom who are returning to work, parents, mums and dads changing jobs, migrants who are coming to Australia to start a new business up in Australia. It wasn't as successful for those cohorts. They did not want to enter into the competitiveness of it. They did not want to feel that they were maybe going to be put to shame if they didn't perform as well. So, great for one group of students, not so great for another group of students. So careful consideration into how these type of applications can be used in the classroom. Some of the others that we've had really great success with, within business and entrepreneurship, business strategy games. Really, really great opportunities for students to collaborate in teams. It is still competitive, but it really gives them, it's almost like a capstone unit for their diplomas where they can pull together all the information they've learnt over the last 18 months and run a business and compete in that business, set all their strategies and effectively run in a market. really great engagement for those type of activities. We have a Career Start program which follows the principles of badging. So students, as they're moving through all of their job readiness activities, move through a badging system, which again can be built into Canvas, for all the activities that they're working through. There are metrics that the teachers and the career staff can then use to actually monitor how students are progressing and what activities they're actually completing. So in summary, from Swinburne's point of view, really great to include in the classroom, must give consideration to how groups are going to work, how teams are going to work. You don't want these activities to become individualised activities where students are starting to isolate themselves from each other. Looking at how discussions can run, how groups can work together to achieve outcomes as a team. Don't forget, though, that your teachers bring an enormous wealth of knowledge with you. Gamified activities, particularly off-the-shelf ones, can be seen as a very easy way of putting a routine into how do you deliver your courses. And they can be great for things like quizzes and taking the monotony out of putting questions back out to students all the time. So really good for that type of thing. But make sure you consider how they fit into the environment and how your teachers are going to really share everything that all the skills that they can bring. As to whether I believe courses will become completely gamified, I know in America there's several schools now that are working on, or have been for the last few years, of almost having their whole education philosophy based on gamified activities. I don't think we will get to that stage. I think it will just be another tool in our teachers' work, in our teachers' delivery. Fits in nicely with immersion experiences, virtual reality. We have virtual reality experiences where students can open up opportunities as they're successful, particularly great for workplace health and safety and hazard identification. So we'll play a big part in how we design courses, but is just one tool in making our students ready for their future lives.
Thank you, that was fantastic. What a collection of ideas about gamification, because they were all of them were very, very different. But we are, if we were counting, we are at learning bomb number 12, which was promised earlier. If we go to Wikipedia, the gamification page, we can see down the bottom in that notes section, British-born video game developer Nick Pelling, self-proclaimed to have coined the term in 2002 as part of his startup. They're talking about gamification. But if we have a look at this CD-ROM here, it's an interactive CD-ROM, which is, I mean, you know it's old, because we don't do those anymore. And that was from Work Cover, because at the time, there were issues with children dying on farms, caught up in tractors and hay balers and drinking poison and things. So I came up with this, where it's characters, and if you look on that side, that's the interface there, where you were grabbing and pushing and interacting with all of these things, and there was a map, and you had to unlock all the parts of the map, because I was working with Nintendo at the time, so it was basically a game. And the minister who was in charge said, this is fantastic. How did you come up with a way of making such morbid material fun for children? And I said, I gamified it. And if you look at the top, oh, it's cut off by the line. I said that in 2001. I invented gamification. But we still have 4 more learning bombs to go, so we've got question time now, so I'm sure you've all got plenty of questions, not about me and how I cope. Please, that's another forum. We'll do that later next year. So who would like to start? Oh, before we do start questioning, you've all got microphones in front of you or sharing. You just press the button to activate it. You'll know it's activated because the red light is on, but we can't all have the red lights on. So when you're not talking, please turn your red light off. Yeah, that's good. So who would like to do the first question? That lady there.
Probably for Andrew, but maybe for everyone else. A lot of what you were talking about was kind of the language that you use around kind of how you can use the language of gamification and games in the teaching and learning process. How do you help students learn that language? Because people who play a lot of games get it. They get the rules, they get the basic structures. For people who don't play games, it's really hard. If you try and tell someone about a game, you often relate to other games. So if someone doesn't have any of that base knowledge, and that could be cultural, that could be a lot of reasons, how do you help students get there?
I'll have a go first and then I can open it up to the panel. So immediately I think of like some games when you go to play them at the start require a lot of setup and a lot of learning to learn how to play the game, right? So they've got tutorial levels or whatnot. So yeah, I think it's a gradual introduction and you could even introduce it as a shift. So instead of topic one this term or instead of subject one, you could show them the substitution language that you're going to implement and then kind of teach them what language you're going to substitute for what you would traditionally use if you wanted to do that.
But if the students move on next year, you've got to keep the culture.
Right, so then the consistency across their whole academic journey is like a whole other huge topic. But for your unit, your subject, your classroom, yeah, you can probably control those elements a little easier.
Any other? You can jump in, just press the... Yep, it's on.
One of the useful things is that I've been trying to encourage students to do is to document their work. It's basically learn to hear their own voice because people are used to not being heard. And so one of the things is whatever they're doing, they should try to make it accessible on a kind of a blog and using the language that they're comfortable with, but of course language that can be published. And so in a sense, if they have to play a game or they start learning a game, they should record the strategies they're getting out of it. They might probably not play it next year, but the fact that they're actually beginning to understand how they think around the game is useful for building the next for developing their next level of tool or inspirational piece of artwork or game.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know that often, regardless of sort of the industry or where it is in terms of work, often they'll have specific languages that are specific to that industry. For instance, coming into the world of evaluation, there's a whole gamut of terms and definitions that mean certain things, but to the company over there, that evaluation company over there, those terms could mean really different things, but you're essentially moving in the same thing. But we've used things like glossaries, basically, and that's not a particularly flashy response, but it's kind of a start to getting some consistency across what those things mean in this specific context that we're working in.
Diana, did you?
Look, the only thing I'll add is for some of the off-the-shelf products, there is often an induction module as well. So the importance of working through that and I guess just working through it with the students and regularly using the terminology.
Another question. Claire, down the front.
I know you all mentioned the leadership board and at the end of the, encouraging students to play the game and make it transparent. But what is your strategy to make students care about leadership board? Do they just do it because they have to do it? Or thanks.
I'll kick off. That's the motivation part of it, right? So it's like that, what's in it for me? Why bother? Why try? And then in my experience, it's like if it's not connected to the outcome or if it's not connected to the assessment, the motivation level drops off. So being explicit with this knowledge helps you to overcome the hurdle that is coming, I think is important, and saying we're not just doing it for the sake of doing it. So being very implicit, we've got learning boards. This lesson links to this objective, links to this key knowledge area, and this quiz will help you do that. There's going to be other modes and other opportunities, and to avoid that level of kind of alienating individual students, that's why teams, and like we touched on as well, can be good as well. And then the motivation comes from being a good teammate, being a good team member, and then you could even introduce rewards. The acquisition and application of the knowledge, if that's not reward enough, I try lollies.
In many cases, we don't enforce the use of leaderboards. We allow the students to opt out of the process if they like to, but they're still able to see their own progress against themselves. And you find that many students who, and look, particularly the older ones, the competitiveness goes, like if you're a 45-year-old migrant, you're not that interested in competing against an 18-year-old gamer. So, but they are interested in improving themselves. So being able to see their own progress without being publicly shown on a leaderboard is worth considering as well.
Probably just add a little bit different in terms of example. I would think that leaderboards are only relevant in some contexts and with some learner audiences, so it's about understanding your learner audience and whether that's going to work. But a little while ago I did see, or was involved in a leaderboard that was basically not to learners, but it was to within the workplace, and it was encouraging the basically, I can't remember exactly what it was encouraging, but the completion of something. And this leaderboard showed the different areas within this particular school and how they were tracking against completing this specific thing. So it really worked in that context. Everyone was at a similar level. So the audience was really similar in terms of level, and they really had that sort of competitive nature, and it worked in that context.
One more strategy is to actually reset them regularly too. So not necessarily have the leaderboard running for a whole semester where the people in front just get further and further ahead, resetting it with each topic or module or after a certain amount of time.
Well, this use of a leaderboard was slightly more subversive. It wasn't just to find the figures, like who was leading, so to speak. It was a particular exercise, and we just wanted to make sure that it was for some short film production, all right, in animation. And it was just to make sure that some students were working. So the system was created where they would come and they would log on. Anytime they logged on, it would keep their work rate, basically show their work rate. And at the end of the day, what we try to get across to them is, look, if you're working for somebody and you're being paid by the hour, they're gonna have to find a way of checking whether you came to work or you did the work, whatever. So it was more from a human resource management kind of training aspect, because artists can be very laid back when it comes to being disciplined. And so it was just used for that process. So there are ways you can manage it. You can motivate them, but you can also, don't quote me on it, whip them. So that's a useful strategy in one particular exercise. It worked.
Yes, Jen.
Thanks, Gordon. We've got a couple of questions from the chat live stream community. So the first question was actually just on your topic, Diana, regarding the cultural barriers that we need to consider when it comes to gamification. So to you first and then open to the panel, are there any ways that we might restructure gamification activities for diverse cohorts in your experiences?
Well, I think for the diverse groups, I'm not a big fan of the leaderboards. I think that I can isolate, and particularly if the cohort is very diverse and has different motivators. So that's one thing I'd consider seriously about whether the leaderboards are going to be providing any benefit or not. It still doesn't mean you can't run the activities in a gamified way without having those leaderboards there. I think focusing on the collaboration and the working as teams in how you're solving problems is very useful for diverse groups as well. So I think trying to move away from individual activities and monitoring individual performance to the collaboration side, which is an essential part of one of our workforce attributes. So it is a skill everyone needs. So they would be my two key things.
I probably want to steer us away from thinking gamification leaderboards. Like it's just one of the elements. We talked about like the elements of a game. That's one very small one. So again, in terms of the teamwork, collaboration, and designing the curriculum as a discovery and a process of discovery with kind of checkpoints and stages, I think is more interesting to me than, we're going to do a Kahoot, right? So differentiating it to different learning levels and different language backgrounds, I think is probably easier in the context of a discovery, because you might have content that is either read, listen, watch, and then working together in groups as well. So yeah, moving away from that. I'm doing a quiz, I'm doing gamification, I've got a leader for board, I'm doing gamification. You're doing part of it. It's one of the elements. What are the other elements, and which ones best suit your cohort is a question for you.
You mentioned something about cultural groups and culture, whatever. I think you probably remember I mentioned groups and I mentioned tribes. And the whole thing is getting teams to identify themselves, getting to realize what they identify around, because it helps them come up with a common ideology that drives their sense of design. For example, I put students in groups to work on projects all the time from day one, based on the credits of movies, just the clusters of that. And I saw a very interesting thing happen. Any of you seen The Life of Pi? Okay, so The Life of Pi came out and won so many awards. I think it was like 16 awards. And the irony of it is the day the awards were being announced, the company was also, Rhythm and Hughes was going bankrupt. The question is, how do you get a very successful movie, right, with many successful outcomes, made profits, but ironically was going bankrupt? Well, I can't answer that question, but the question I can answer is that in it, looking at the credits, I recognized 21 people that I knew, and that these 21 people belonged to 2 tribes that had been in a class previously. And so the question I did was, what's going to happen to these guys? So I emailed one of them, and they came back and they said, oh, we don't have a problem. We got our tribes hired. And what happened was these people, because they identified as teams, they were able to pitch their ideas to companies. So they pitched an idea to Mattel. I'm sure you know Mattel, who make the toys, toy-making company. Mattel picked them up and said, okay, yeah, come and work for us. You see, so that the sense of identity can be created at that level where you get the students, when they start training, to learn to work around a common ideology and identify themselves as a group. They're the same kinds of people also who, when one gets a project, they'll probably text the other one and say, hey, I've got this project, can you come and work on it? And they're also the seeds for companies. If we look at any other successful companies that have come up, like Pixar and others, they started off as groups of friends, people who had a common ideology. So that's one of the things that I think is really useful, encouraging students to work in groups or clubs or clusters, reporting as a club as well, one of those things.
I don't have a lot to add other than I agree with the other panel members. I think it's really interesting because at the moment we've got a group of learners that are engaging with a course called Evaluating Systems Change and Place-Based Approaches. So we've got a global learner base, everyone from obviously locally to people from Yemen to people from India engaging with this particular course, and the cultural elements come into play there. But we are fostering at the moment, a lot of discussion, a lot of dialogue, so that the group starts to understand each other, despite obviously having clear differences geographically and culturally. And the next step will be working in this sort of group dynamic, but not before just general dialogue to understand each other and understand where everyone's coming from and the different spaces.
We have time for one more question. Jen, it's online, is it?
Yes, sorry. We still have a couple of questions from the online community. One of the topics that was interested in is around the tools, especially when cost can be quite a limited factor in the area that you're working with. One specifically was to you, Mark, the student, I think it was the colour-coded one that you used. How did you create that, or what did you use? But also any recommendations in terms of free tools that you have used that people can start small and start to introduce these ideas into where they work and what they do. Thank you.
That score predictor was just in Excel. Yeah, so it's not free, but I mean, if you want to get Excel 1998, you can probably find it for free. And the rest, like quizzes, I think is free. Some of the quizzing stuff's free. But again, for the real outcomes, you can design a classroom, a lecture, a tutorial as a game with pens and papers. And that's free too.
The whole thing about why I'm so interested in groups. Think about the army. It's always about platoons, right? They always work in teams. And what happens in the group dynamic is very soon students are sharing their software and they're telling you where they've seen whatever links, whatever. And so working in those kinds of teams very quickly establishes a kind of new fortitude that they wouldn't get from anywhere else. So I think I've learned a lot from working in teams and groups, so I just advocate that, even for software, hardware.
Well, can we please thank our panellists? We do have a blog as well, tinyurl.com/VE design. If you want to pick up, we'll be posting this information that we've discussed here, and there's also other information up there about the kind of things that we do in our team.